episode 174 of the Listening Time podcast. Thank you all for listening. I hope that you're doing great today. I hope that your English learning is going well. And I hope that some of you are actually starting to speak English and not just listen. And that's the topic of today's episode. I want to talk about how to start speaking English. I've talked about this a number of times in different episodes, but today I want to dedicate this whole episode to this topic. Okay, so I just recently started speaking French consistently. Before that, I just listened and read in French. But recently, about a month and a half ago, I think, I started having regular French conversations, consistent French conversations, and I'll use that as kind of a reference to talk about how you can start speaking English. So this will be an important episode, an important topic for all of you, even if you've already started speaking English. I think this episode will give you some tips, maybe some advice to make sure that you're really utilizing your time in the best way possible when you speak English. Okay? So I think that you'll really enjoy this episode, and I hope that it's helpful for you. And remember that you can use my advanced podcast episodes to start listening to real English spoken fast. In those episodes, I speak at normal speed. So if you want those, the link to sign up is down below in the episode description below this episode. And you can also sign up for my US Conversations podcast. In that podcast, I talk to people from all around the United States, and we talk about different topics such as their city or their state where they live, and we compare different parts of the country, and it's a lot of fun. And of course, I provide the transcript for each of those episodes, and those transcripts also have the definitions of key words and phrases that we use. So that's a really helpful tool that will allow you to practice listening to two people talking, practice listening to a conversation and not just one person talking to you, right? So the link to sign up is also down below. And of course, you have the transcript for this episode down below as well. All right, let's get started. Are your ears ready? You know what time it is. It's listening time. Okay, let's talk about starting to speak in English. How do you start speaking? First of all, I want to mention that I think it's important to start when you feel ready to start. Okay? I don't think that people should start speaking when they really don't want to, they really don't feel like it. Sometimes people don't want to, but it's because they're nervous or they haven't done it before. That's different. I think you should kind of push yourself to start, even if you don't want to because you feel nervous, but in reality, you already understand English really well and you should start. I'm talking about when you just don't have a good enough comprehension to feel like you can even have a conversation with someone. So if that's your case, then my advice is to not start before you feel like you can manage that situation, because it's really stressful if you start to have a conversation with someone and you can't understand them well. That is not a good situation to be in, especially if that teacher doesn't speak your language and they don't speak really slowly. That's not a good situation. So my advice would be to start speaking when you feel like you can understand enough English that you can manage a conversation with someone speaking to you in English, even if your speaking level is low. So if you can understand a good amount of English and you feel like you're ready to try to have a conversation, then you should. Okay? At that point, you should push yourself to start speaking, but don't force it and try to do it too early before you're ready. I think that can have some negative effects, right? So push yourself, but don't be too eager that you're just starting to speak even though you can't understand English. So that would be my advice, but other people disagree with me, and that's okay. This is just my personal opinion. Okay, when you do feel like you want to start speaking, how do you do this? I assume most of you aren't just surrounded by people that you can practice English with, right? So how do you do this? Well, I always recommend using a website like italki, for example. There are other similar websites as well, but the one that I'm familiar with is italki. And I always recommend using this website to find native speakers who are teachers or tutors, and you can have conversations with them. So for example, right now, I am a student on italki learning French, and I take conversation classes with 3 different teachers at this time. So I've found 3 different italki French tutors who I have conversations with. And this is something I would recommend to you. I think it's great to find 2 or 3 different teachers so that you can hear different styles of speaking. You can talk about different topics depending on what those teachers are interested in and what you're interested in. And we usually have different conversations with different people. So I like to have that variety. And for me, for French, for example, we have different genders in French. We have masculine and feminine. So for me, it's important to practice talking to men and women in French. So I have 1 female French tutor and 2 male French tutors because this forces me to use the feminine version of adjectives and things like that. So that's good practice for me. For English, that's not the case because we don't have those different genders when it comes to the language. But I think it could still be good to have male and female tutors if you want, but it's not that big of a deal. Not like when you're learning French, for example.
Verwandle deine Leidenschaft mit Shopify in ein Business und knack Umsatzrekorde mit dem Checkout mit der weltweit besten Conversion. Du hast richtig gehört. Der Checkout mit der weltweit besten Conversion. Der legendäre Checkout von Shopify vereinfacht das Shoppen auf deiner Website bis hin zu Social Media und überall dazwischen. Ja, das ist Musik für deine Ohren. Wie du es auch drehst und wendest, mit Shopify kannst du zu einem echten Hit werden. Starte deinen Test noch heute für nur €1 pro Monat auf shopify.de/Rekorde.
And if you've listened to any of my US Conversations episodes, you've seen that I have conversations with different English teachers on italki. Some of them are men, some of them are women. So if you're looking for teachers and you don't know where to start, maybe you can contact some of those teachers that I talk to on my US Conversations podcast. Maybe you liked a certain conversation that I had with a certain teacher on that podcast, and you go and start taking classes with that person because they sound like a good teacher and someone that you'd be interested in talking to. So that could be a great starting point. Maybe you can start with some of those teachers that I talk to on that podcast. So that's just an idea. But I would recommend testing these teachers out, and this might take a little while. You might need to take a few classes with them. That's okay. You're getting a lot of practice while you're doing that. And maybe after a few classes, you decide whether or not you like having conversations with them, and you decide whether or not they're a good teacher. And then if you like them, you can continue on with them. So it takes a little while to find your 2 or 3 teachers. It took me a while for French. It took me almost a month, I think, probably like 3 weeks taking classes with different teachers. But now I have my teachers, so that's great. So what are the criteria? What criteria should you use when choosing a teacher? I talked about this in my episode about English teachers, but I'll just quickly mention these different criteria that I use. Number 1, the teacher should be able to manage the conversation well. Okay? If the teacher is not doing that well and you feel like you have to manage the class, that's usually not a good sign. That's a lot of work for you, right? The teacher should be the one really managing the conversation, making you feel like the conversation is flowing very naturally, and the class should just feel easy in that sense. Maybe not the English part of it, but the conversation itself should feel easy and natural. You shouldn't feel like you have to make a ton of effort to manage the conversation and ask them a ton of questions because they're not asking you questions. You don't want that. You want the class